So this is a video on repairing the ball joint on ground control E36 lower rear control arms. These are the adjustable control arms. um, these are the steel variety. I bought these 4 or 5 years ago from Bimmer World, but they're made by ground control. I think now they make aluminum ones that are lighter, maybe stronger. But I've been having a clunk noise from the rear for a while, maybe 2 years, and had replaced a couple other parts, chasing down whatever I thought the noise was coming from, and eventually pinpointed that the ball joint was gone, pretty much worn out. The dust seal was gone, and I pulled it off right there, but it was definitely off the joint. So in trying to figure out how to replace these, I first thought that you could use the OEM joint that you use on the other rear control arms of the E36. But when I called Bimmer World, they didn't know. They said call ground control. Called ground control. They said no, it's a special part. We'll send it to you for $25 each, which is a little more than you I think would pay for a decent OEM ball joint. So the issue with ground control is they're not very good at customer service. Part of my problem was trying to avoid using them for this, but it was kind of painful. They ask you to fill out contact forms on their website to describe what you need, and they'll contact you. Of course, they didn't contact me for a week. Called them back, eventually placed the order online with them. Another week went by. Oh, they forgot to ship it out, was in the wrong bin, yada yada. They're not really good at customer service. You couldn't click and buy the item on their website. It's not listed. So eventually got the item in the mail today, and I'm starting to do this repair. So I thought I'd post this information since it might be useful to other people. Couldn't find anything out there on the web or on YouTube about doing this repair. There's a couple things you might learn from this, so we're going to go over that. So the first thing I noticed when I pulled this off, and I'm trying to figure out, why it went bad in the first place. This is the passenger side control arm. The driver's side seems to be in good shape. When you look at the arm and the alignment of, this is the outside joint. That's the inside that attaches to the subframe. If you look at the flats here, that's perfectly vertical right now on my bench. And you come across, this end is not quite vertical or 90 degrees to the bench, so it should be like that. It's more like that when this one's vertical. So I think on one side, probably on this side, it was crooked in the where it attaches to the subframe. This you can see should not move like that normally. It should be pretty tight. That was probably pinched, something like that, over time. And I would get the clunk when I would back out of my driveway. A couple seconds after I back out, it would pop. So I think the movement of it back and forth would eventually wear it out. So I think when I had this aligned by the shop, they probably just adjusted the adjuster to get the alignment, the camber right, but didn't pay attention, and I probably didn't tell them, or they didn't know that this, I think, should be completely flat with this side. And so when I put this back in, I'm going to make sure that's the case, by playing with the adjustments here without changing the length of the bar which would affect camber slightly. So that's the first thing I noticed. So the other thing I learned is with the actual joint, as I mentioned, they said that the joint was custom, or you had to buy it from them. I was suspicious, but anyway, I bought their joints. For first of all, this is the OEM joint you can buy, Lemforder. Not a bad German brand. I've used them before. That's what it looks like. I bought 2 of these. I'm probably just going to hold on to them for future use. Who knows? This is the ground control joint. I just labeled it GC just so I know which one's which. But once you unbox it, you can see what they do is they grind a flat on this the outside bore. This is what gets pressed into the tubular section of the arm. All the other dimensions are the same. I use calipers to measure, the outside diameter. This length here is all the same. If you look at them side by side, same thing. So, not totally forthcoming by ground control, but I guess I'm not surprised. The markings on this one of these has. So it's a Delphi part number. I did not look this up yet, but I will, and I'll post some information in the description of the video. Curious what these price at. I'm not sure Delphi is a brand I would buy for a German car, but I guess ground control buys them, and they probably send them out to be machined, which is basically just, and you can see even right there, there's a little bit of a machining error there. There's 2 different angles being ground there. So you could do this on your bench grinder at home. You could maybe drill a small spot, because what that flat is for is this set screw. So when that goes in, the set screw keeps it in place from, I guess, rotating or moving around. It's a press-in fit, so I don't know why you need that set screw, but that's why they do that. I think you could probably roll without the set screw, but we'll see once we press these out, if that's the case or not. So you could get away with buying a OEM joint at whatever price point you can find and grinding your own flat. It's just a couple, maybe a millimeter or 2. Not sure if that's going to help, but you can see it's a little bit, a little trial and error. You could figure out, how to get that right. So, a couple weeks plus wait, $25 plus shipping from California, for basically something I could have bought locally and done myself. Maybe that's the first lesson learned for people watching this video. Don't wait around on ground control. Don't think you've got to buy their custom joint. Most guys in the garage could do this in no time at all. So to start breaking these down, the first thing I did was find a Allen key that would fit. This one's a 3mm, and it's a little bit loose, but with a little bit of pressure I was able to break that bolt, that Allen set screw loose. If it's more rusted on your car, you might want to let it soak, or you might end up having to cut it out. So that's what comes out. Probably just a couple threads there is all it's sitting in. But 3mm is what worked for me. So the next step is pressing this joint out. Now, it's a good thing I asked the guy on the phone at Ground Control when I bought these about any tips for installation, and he said pay attention to the direction you press it out, because it only goes out one way. You can see on this side the wall here is thinner. This is the way it's going to come out, and you're going to press from the side that's got a thicker wall. So there's a bit of a lip in there. If you press it out this way, it's going to hit that lip and probably mushroom out or stretch out the tube, probably ruining the arm. So good thing I asked. I don't know if I would have noticed this myself. And a press can apply a lot more pressure than you think, and it could have blown that out pretty easily. So we're going to press from this from this side down and get this out. So I'll show you the press it up in a second. So I've got this all ready to go in my press. This is just a 20 ton Harbor Freight special I bought a year or more ago. It's great for what it does, but I don't use it that often. But it'll make very easy work of this job. You could probably do it in a vise if you had, or hammer it out if you really have to. But so what I've got here is a 30 millimeter socket that seems to be a good size to press on the joint, outer race of the joint, ball joint, and just an old brake piston that I use as a die to catch the joint as it goes in. You want something that's going to be wider than the joint coming out, but for the arm to sit on as you press it down. So you could use blocks of wood, whatever you got. So this should take just a couple seconds here. I'm not going to be able to record much while I'm doing this. Let's see if we can do it. Yeah, I'm going to do it and put the camera down. So we got the joint out. Press took about 15 seconds to get it out. A little rusty, obviously. That's probably what's going to give you the most resistance, is just how rusty your joint is. So it might be worth soaking it a bit in oil, or I don't know, maybe some heat if you have trouble. So the first thing that caught my eye is, well, here's our set screw, and there's where the flat would be ground in on the new joint. And you can see on this one there isn't much of a flat. Someone just hit it with a grinder. A handheld grinder or a bench grinder. Not as finely machined as the new one. So in essence, all somebody did on this one was press in an OEM joint, and just touched up that side so it wouldn't rotate. Now I doubt this is going to rotate anyway, even without that set screw, like I said before. But when I bought these, they were all assembled, so this is probably how they did it 4 or 5 years ago. And this joint, I don't know if I mentioned before, this joint is kind of weird because the boot is clear. There's the old boot. It's like a clear plastic. It's almost like a plastic, not even a rubber. So I don't know what kind of shit they were using before, but I think an OEM rubber boot is going to be better here. So hopefully this will last the life of my car, or longer than the 2 or 3 or 4 years that I ran these before they started making noise. So LOL, Ground Control, nice job there. So we're gonna clean this up a little bit and press in the new joint. Okay, so we've got the old joint out. The bore here is cleaned up. It looks pretty good. Just a little bit of dirt and grease, but you can see a little bit of that lip there on this side. So as I mentioned before, that lip, you want to press it out in the other direction. But I guess that lip is there, so when you press it in, you know how far to go. So when the joint is in there, it's centered, which you could do by your eye, but I guess they put that lip in there just so you don't overdo it. So with the new joint, that's where it's going to go in. Line that flat up with the set screw hole and press it back in, and that should be done. So one quick note on pressing it in. So the 30mm socket I used before, I got away with it because there was no boot to get in the way, and I didn't care what happened to it as I pressed it out. On the new one, it's not going to fit over the boot without a squeeze or potentially damaging the boot. You don't want to do that. So in my little container of things I use to press stuff, old brake pistons and wheel bearing races and tubes and whatnot, I found a wheel bearing race that just happens to fit perfectly. So that matches. You want to press on the outer section of this joint as you press it into the control arm. You don't want to press on this part because that puts stress on the ball joint, and you might stretch it a little bit, and then it's going to open up and loosen up prematurely. So lucked out here. I have a bunch of other sockets I probably could have used. I just happened to find this. This is hardened steel and should work fine. But yeah, a socket or some cleverly placed pieces of wood or something could also do it for you. Just a quick shot of the press. I've already pressed it in a little bit. It's going in pretty easy. I put some anti-seize on the inside of the arm, lined up the flat on the joint with that set screw hole, and I've got just a plate to provide some even force down on it all. So it's going down. I can even just use my hand on the pump, and it's going down easy. So I'll finish this in a second. And one more quick note, as you get farther down, the joint is going to start to stick through the bottom, so you want something to catch it. So I felt a little bit of resistance, and I got to put something down here, so I added that piston back in there. Just do that, or else you might ruin the joint if you press it down too hard. So after I got it down most of the way, see, I'm not quite there yet. It's got to go that way, maybe 1/8 of an inch. The thing I was using to press was so wide that it was starting to contact the red arm. So what I had to do was grind it down a little bit on my grinder to get that, narrow enough to fit inside the control arm bore, so I could push the bearing, the joint down just a little bit more inside, into the arm below, the surface. So one other way you could get around that would be to get a small screwdriver and just pop off these metal clips, ring, compression, whatever you want to call it, spring clips, and on the outside one and maybe even the inside one, remove the boot and get a socket that could do the job, smaller than the arm bore size, but not interfere with the boot and potentially damage the boot. I didn't do that. A couple minutes on the grinder was all it took, and now you can see it's going to fit inside the red part of the arm and not interfere. So almost there. So I've got the joint all the way in. You can see it's centered in the arm. It's up against the lip on this side, and no damage to the boot. Grinding this down worked out pretty well. If you use a press, and I've had this problem before, they're so powerful, you could, as you press things together, if they go in crooked or they go, past the point they should, they will easily start to bend and destroy the metal that they're being pressed into without you even realizing it. So you got to go kind of slow, couple pumps, pull it off, and check your clearances and pump it a couple more times, and now you're good. So I'm happy with the way this went so far. Set screw is in. Next step is to align up the ends like I mentioned before. So that shouldn't take too long, and then I'll put this back in.